They said I was too weak to fight back, so they left me in an old house to fade away quietly. But they forgot one thing: I still had breath in my lungs and fire in my soul. I'll never forget the cold of that morning. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather, this one was deeper. It crawled under your skin and settled inside your bones. A quiet, heavy cold that told you something in your life was about to break. David's truck came to a slow stop at the edge of a gravel driveway. The tires crunched against weeds that had grown wild over the years. He stepped out without saying much, slammed the door shut, and stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the house like it was something rotten he didn't want to touch. "This is it," he said, not looking at me. The house belonged to my grandmother, someone I hadn't seen in years. It looked just like I remembered, only worse. The porch sagged like it was tired. Paint peeled off the wood like old skin. Vines had climbed up one side of the house, trying to pull it back into the earth. This was supposed to be where I'd rest. At least, that's what David and his mother said, where I'd stay peacefully for the rest of my time. I was still only 38. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands tightly folded in my lap, my legs stiff. I'd had a mild stroke a few months ago. Walking was still hard. I could move, just not quickly. But that didn't matter to Carol, my mother-in-law. She told David this place would be better for me. "It's quiet out there," she had said. "Emily can rest, and when it's her time, it'll be peaceful." Her words echoed in my mind like a goodbye no one wanted to say out loud. When it's her time, like I was already gone. David came around to open my door. His face was unreadable, somewhere between pity and annoyance. "You'll be comfortable here. There's someone to check in on you. Cleaner air than the city, good for your heart." I wanted to scream. My heart was already breaking in that driveway. I glanced toward the porch. A woman stood there, leaning against the railing, maybe in her late 50s. She was overweight, wearing a stained shirt, hair messy like she hadn't brushed it in days. She lit a cigarette without even a full glance at me. "That's Janet," David said. "She's your caretaker. I'll pay her monthly." Out of my inheritance money, I thought bitterly. He went to the back of the truck and pulled out the wheelchair, set it gently on the gravel. Then he turned back to me and held out his hand. "Come on, Emily, let's get you settled." Settled! Like I was some old chair he was storing away in the attic. I didn't move. My hands gripped the edge of the car door, my body tensed. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong. But what could I do? My voice still cracked when I tried to argue. My legs still trembled when I stood too long. I had trusted David for years, and now that trust was being used to lock me away. David bent down, scooped me into his arms like I weighed nothing, and gently placed me in the wheelchair. My face burned, not from shame, but from a deep, boiling rage I couldn't even speak out loud. Janet flicked her cigarette, muttered something, and disappeared inside the house. David pushed me toward the porch and into the front door. The air inside smelled like dust, mold, and something faintly sour, like food that had been left out too long. The walls were bare, except for a few rusty hooks where family photos once hung. "I'll check in every couple of weeks," David said. "Janet will take care of the day-to-day. You don't have to worry about a thing." A thing. Like I didn't think anymore, like I didn't feel. When he carried my bags in, he barely looked me in the eye. Then he stepped outside, pulling out his phone. I wheeled myself to the window. David stood by his truck, tapping something into the screen. Then he looked up at the house one last time, not with guilt, not even sadness. Just relief. He waved once, awkwardly, climbed into the cab, and drove away without looking back. I sat there by the window for a long time. Even after the sound of the truck disappeared down the road. My fingers gripped the armrest so tightly they turned white. And that's when it hit me. Something sharp, hot, electric. Not grief, not fear. Anger. And beneath that anger, something I hadn't felt since before the stroke. Strength. I used to think I made a smart choice. A safe choice. David wasn't flashy or wild. He didn't drink too much. He didn't disappear with friends for days. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who opened car doors and remembered my coffee order. When we met, I was 25, full of energy, working as an assistant to a CEO at a logistics firm. I was chasing dreams, fueled by caffeine and ambition. I wanted my own business someday. I wanted to build something real. David sold insurance, reliable job, predictable hours, a quiet life. At the time, that sounded perfect. Our wedding was small. A few folding chairs, some wildflowers, and Carol's backyard as the venue. She cried when she hugged me. "You're my daughter now," she had whispered. And I believed her. I believed all of it. For a while, it was good. David would bring takeout on nights I worked late, rub my shoulders when I was glued to my laptop. He wasn't romantic, but he was there. But Carol never approved of how hard I worked. She always had comments. "You don't want to wear yourself out before kids, dear," she'd say with a tight smile. Her idea of the perfect life was old-fashioned. Sunday lunches, home-cooked dinners, church dresses, and obedient wives. David was her golden boy, and I was just the woman who hadn't yet fallen into line. When I landed my first big contract at work, I was glowing. I talked about applying for a promotion. Carol smiled stiffly. That night, David told me, "Maybe slow down a little. Mom worries you're pushing too hard." I laughed it off, but deep down it hurt. As time passed, I started shrinking myself to fit into his world. I cooked more, worked less, bit my tongue more than I should have. My dreams became background noise. Until the letter came. It was a plain white envelope. The handwriting on the front was neat and familiar. When I opened it, I sat still for a long time, staring at the words. My grandmother had passed, and she left me part of her estate, a chunk of money and a house I'd never even seen, just stories she used to tell me when I was a kid. I didn't know how to feel. "Babe, what's wrong?" David asked, tossing his keys into the bowl by the door. I inherited something," I said softly. When he read the letter, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. And for a brief moment, I thought, maybe this will fix things. Maybe we'll finally build that life we talked about. Carol brought champagne that night. "You're our lucky girl," she told me, kissing my cheek. And suddenly, everything changed. Carol stopped judging my long hours. David started coming home early. He lit candles at dinner again, held my hand more, smiled like the man I first fell in love with. I wanted so badly to believe it was love. But deep inside, something felt off. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. I was shopping one afternoon, looking for a tie to surprise David. He'd been dressing better lately, wearing cologne again. I thought it was because we were reconnecting. When I stepped out of the boutique, I saw him. Across the street. With her. A young woman with long auburn hair. They were laughing. He leaned in, brushed her arm. She touched his chest. Then she kissed him. And my world went still. My heart didn't break right then. It just cracked. A small crack. But deep. I didn't confront him that night. Not yet. Instead, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I hired a private investigator. A week later, I sat in a cheap office with buzzing lights. The investigator slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photos, dozens of them. David and the same woman. Her name was Lily. They were at restaurants, walking through parks, checking into a hotel, laughing, touching, living a second life. The report had transcripts too. One line still burns into my memory. "Once Emily's money clears, I can finally open my own business. We'll be set, Lily. She won't need it long anyway, not with her health." They were already planning my exit. That night, I called Tatiana, my old college roommate, one of the few people I still trusted. I told her everything. The affair, the inheritance, the way Carol looked at me like I was already gone. When I stopped talking, she was quiet for a moment. "You need to start thinking about what's next," she said. "You can't stay with someone who's already erased you." I wanted to scream, to break something, to collapse on the kitchen floor and just cry. But I didn't. I just sat there, numb, staring at the photos. And then the stroke hit. It happened on a Tuesday. I was at the office, going through contracts. My head hurt a little, but I ignored it. My vision blurred for just a second, then came back. I tried to stand, but the left side of my body gave out. I collapsed. Next thing I remember, I was lying in a hospital bed. White sheets, beeping machines, the sharp scent of disinfectant. David was holding my hand. Carol stood nearby with red-rimmed eyes. "You're going to be okay," David whispered, brushing my hair back gently. "We'll take care of you." Those words kept playing in my mind for weeks. "We'll take care of you." At first, I believed them. I thought maybe the affair was over. Maybe this would bring us closer again. Maybe he realized how fragile life could be. But recovery was slow, and soon things began to change. David stayed late at work more often. Carol took over managing everything, my medications, my meals, my schedule. They spoke softly around me, like I wasn't really there. "We should start looking into home care," I heard her whisper once. "Someplace quiet, peaceful." They thought I couldn't hear, but I did. They thought I couldn't understand, but I could. Then one morning, David walked into the living room, sat beside me, and said it like he was announcing a vacation. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time for a fresh start at your grandmother's property. It's quiet there," he added. "Good for healing." Healing. But I knew that's not what he meant. He was preparing me to disappear. A soft exit. Out of his life. Away from Carol's disapproving eyes. Out of the way of the new life he was building with Lily. And I knew it. I didn't cry. By then, I had already cried all the tears I had left. So when the day came, the day he loaded the truck and drove me out there, I sat in silence, watching the trees blur past the window. When he unloaded my bags, when he lifted me into that wheelchair, when he told me I'd be comfortable here, I made a promise. Not to him, not to Carol. To myself. "You may have written me off, David, but I am far from finished." When his truck disappeared down that dirt road, silence followed. The wind stilled, even the birds seemed to stop. I sat in that old wheelchair, staring at the screen door Janet had left swinging open. It creaked on rusty hinges like it was complaining too. The house was colder than I remembered from childhood. Empty, hollow, the kind of place that holds echoes from years ago and still smells like dust and sorrow. Dust floated in golden shafts of light. Mildew clung to the corners. It felt like a place meant for ghosts. This was where they wanted me to die quietly. Where they thought I'd give up, fade. Janet came back from one of the back rooms, scratching her neck, her face already bored. "Bedroom's cleared," she said. "Sheets are clean enough, bathrooms down the hall. Don't expect me here every day. I'll check in when I can." Her eyes didn't even meet mine. She grabbed her coat and left. The screen door slammed behind her with a sharp bang that echoed through the house. And then I was alone. Truly alone. I sat there. Still. Staring at my hands, gripping the wheelchair's arms. They were trembling, but not from weakness. Not this time. From anger. From something deeper. Betrayal so heavy it wrapped around my chest and squeezed. Then out of nowhere, I laughed. A small, bitter laugh that sounded strange even to my own ears. It felt absurd. All of it. David, Carol, Janet. None of them saw me anymore. They didn't see Emily. They saw a burden, a bank account, a problem to move far away. And that was the moment I decided. I was done being their problem. I moved my hands to the arms of the chair, braced myself, took a deep breath, and stood. Slowly, carefully. My legs were stiff, my knees shook. But they held. One shaky step, then another. And there I was, standing in the middle of the living room. Heart pounding. Breath shallow. But I was standing. The truth, I'd been getting better, quietly, secretly. Physical therapy had helped. I could walk short distances without support now. But I never told David, never told Carol. Why? Because I needed to know what they would do if they thought I couldn't fight back. And now I knew. They abandoned me. So I laughed again, this time louder, stronger. Then I grabbed my phone and dialed the only person who had never walked away. Tatiana. She picked up on the second ring. Emily, where are you? I've been calling and texting. David said you were. Oh my God, are you okay? I'm fine, I said, though my throat tightened around the lie. He left me at my grandmother's house, said it's good for my heart. There was silence, then a soft, sharp exhale. I'm coming, tonight. Don't move anything heavy, do you hear me? I smiled. Even through the ache in my chest. Even through the dust and betrayal. She was coming. When the call ended, I looked around at the peeling wallpaper and broken blinds. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt dangerous. I didn't waste a second. After the call with Tatiana, something inside me shifted, like a match had been lit in a room full of darkness. I began to explore the house. Slowly at first, dragging my hand along the wall for balance, but I moved with purpose. Every step was a silent declaration. I'm still here, I'm still me, and I'm not giving up. The kitchen was nearly empty, just a few dented pans, dusty jars, and drawers filled with mismatched silverware. The floor creaked under my feet like it hadn't been touched in years. The bedroom held a sagging mattress, but the walls were strong. The ceiling didn't leak, and the window faced the sunrise. The bathroom smelled like bleach and mold. I opened the cabinet and found half-used soaps and expired medicines. The porch leaned slightly, but it stood. Everything was rough. But everything could be saved. By the time headlights swept across the window later that evening, I had already made a mental list of what to fix. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a mission. The screen door burst open. Emily, Tatiana rushed in, still in her scrubs from the hospital where she worked. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. They left you here, alone, with her, Janet. Yeah, I said dryly, she's a real gem. Tatiana didn't laugh. She stepped closer slowly, her eyes narrowing. You're standing, she said, stunned. I am, I replied. We stared at each other for a second. Then her lips pulled into a small, proud smile. So what's the plan? I blinked. A plan. Up until now, all I had wanted was to survive the night. But when she said it like that, it sparked something in me. I'm not going back, I said, my voice low but sure. Not to him, not to her. This is my house now, my life, and I'm going to rebuild it. Tatiana didn't hesitate. She pulled a folded toolkit from her bag and handed it to me like a sword. Then let's start with the locks, she said. If David ever comes back, he's knocking first. That night we worked for hours. We scrubbed the kitchen floor, replaced the broken lock on the front door, found old curtains in the hallway closet and hung them over the bare windows. We laughed, sometimes bitterly, sometimes freely, as we talked about Carol's passive-aggressive comments, David's pitiful excuses, and the twisted way they both thought they were being kind. Kind, Tatiana scoffed. They dumped you here like an old couch. That's not kindness, that's cowardice. She was right. But it didn't matter anymore. Because now I was here. And I was done waiting for someone to save me. We fixed what we could until the power finally came back in half the house. Then we collapsed onto the dusty old couch, both of us covered in sweat, our hands raw from cleaning and fixing. Tatiana handed me a cold bottle of water. "Emily," she said softly, "you know this isn't just about the house, right?" I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She gestured around us, at the walls, the dust, the cracks. "This is about everything they tried to take from you, and what you're taking back." I didn't answer right away. I just gripped the bottle tighter, the cool plastic pressing against my palms. She was right. This wasn't just about an old house in the woods. This was about my identity. My strength. My life. Later that night, after Tatiana had fallen asleep on the couch, I stood by the window. Outside, the wind had calmed. The night smelled like wet leaves and wild earth. I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered to myself, "This is mine, this life, these choices, this space." No more silence, no more fear. Tomorrow I rebuild. The next morning, sunlight crept in slowly, soft, golden, and gentle. It slipped through the old curtains, casting long stripes across the bedroom wall. Dust floated in the beams like tiny stars, dancing through the silence. I woke up sore from head to toe. But it was a new kind of pain. Not the kind that comes from grief or weakness. This was the ache of effort, of movement, of life returning to my body. For the first time in months, I felt alive. Tatiana had already left for work by the time I walked into the kitchen, but she had left something behind, a note taped to the cabinet. "You're stronger than you think. Call me when you're ready to hit the hardware store." I smiled. A real smile, not forced, not fake. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket like a charm. Then I stepped outside, barefoot on the creaky porch, and really looked around. The land was wild, unruly, overgrown, but beautiful in its own stubborn way. The air smelled of sun-warmed grass, cedar trees, and possibility. For years I had rushed through everything. Work, marriage, obligations. I had moved so fast I barely remembered to breathe. But now, in this quiet, I felt something new. Not sadness. Not even peace. Just a space. A space to grow. The first few weeks were hard. Harder than I expected. Cleaning out an old house is no joke, especially when your body still isn't back to full strength. I scrubbed mold off old bathroom tiles, hauled broken furniture into the yard, patched leaks in the roof. I watched YouTube videos to learn how to fix things I didn't even have names for. My hands blistered, my back ached, my knees cracked with every step. But I didn't stop. Because with every nail I hammered in, every board I sanded smooth, I reclaimed a piece of myself. One morning, I was outside struggling with an old lawn mower that kept coughing and dying. That's when I heard a truck pull up. I looked up, wiping sweat from my forehead. A man stepped out. Tall, broad shoulders, rough hands, eyes the color of storm clouds before a summer storm. He looked like someone who knew how to fix things with very few words. "You planning to tame all that with that thing?" he asked, nodding toward the mower, an amused smirk playing on his face. I stared at him for a second. "Got a better idea," I shot back. He grinned, turned without a word, and walked to the back of his truck. He pulled out a gas-powered trimmer that looked like it could chew through a jungle. "I'll handle it," he said. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "I don't need charity," I replied. "It's not charity," he said simply. "It's a favor. Consider it a trade. You let me feel useful today." Before I could argue again, he yanked the starter cord and got to work. Within an hour, half the yard was cleared. The knee-high weeds were gone, replaced with neat strips of clean dirt and green. When he cut the engine and wiped his brow, he looked around and nodded. "Not bad," he said. "You ever need help, you call me. I'm Luke Harris. I live just down that road." And then he drove away. Just like that. No questions, no judgment, just help. And it wasn't just Luke. Word traveled fast in small towns. Within days, people I had never met started showing up. Mrs. Alvarez from the general store brought fresh pies and paint samples. A retired schoolteacher named Martha stopped by and offered to help catalog the dusty books I found in the attic. Even Sheriff Daniels showed up one afternoon. "Heard you might need new locks," he said, tipping his hat. "Thought I'd swing by and check." At first, I kept waiting for the catch. For someone to ask for something in return. But no one did. They just helped. They smiled. They left behind kindness, small and quiet, like seeds they trusted would grow. Luke came by more than anyone. Sometimes he fixed things, replaced broken window panes, patched the sagging porch. Other times, he just sat with me, sipping sweet tea on the porch and talking about life. One night, under the slow orange-pink sunset, he opened up. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said softly. "Cancer, I buried her on a Tuesday, haven't had a full night's sleep since." His voice was low, honest, a little cracked around the edges. "The ranch keeps me sane," he added, "gives me a reason to wake up." I didn't say anything. Just reached out and placed my hand over his. Rough and warm. He didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time, listening to the trees sway in the evening wind. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything yet. But it felt like safety. Like beginning again. With the house slowly turning into something livable, my focus shifted to the land. I started a small garden, awkwardly at first. Just a patch of soil and a few seed packets Tatiana had mailed me with a sticky note that read, "Grow something, anything, let it remind you, life can start again." At first the plants looked like nothing, just specks of green poking through dry earth, but day by day they began to rise, and with every inch they grew, so did I. Luke helped me build raised beds from leftover lumber. He showed me how to mix compost, how to test soil with my fingers, and how to spot the good worms, the ones that meant your dirt was alive. We worked side by side, him quiet, me curious. Our conversations were slow but steady, like the land itself. There was something about digging into the earth that made me feel grounded, real. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't worried about David. I wasn't waiting for Carol to call or trying to prove myself to anyone. I was just here. One Saturday, the nearby town held a farmer's market. Luke convinced me to bring a small basket of my tomatoes and peppers. "It's not about the money," he said. "It's about standing in the sunshine and saying, 'This is mine. I grew this.'" I laughed, but I packed a basket anyway. At the market, I set up a tiny folding table under an umbrella. I felt shy, unsure. Who would want vegetables from someone like me? But by noon, everything was gone. Every tomato, every pepper, sold. Mrs. Alvarez clapped her hands. "Honey, you keep this up. You'll have your own stall in no time." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, counting the small pile of dollar bills. It wasn't much. But that wasn't the point. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming part of something. A town, a rhythm, a life. The nightmare still came sometimes. David's voice, Carol's cold stare, the feeling of being forgotten. But now I had anchors. Luke, Tatiana, and this house. One day, after Luke and I finished setting up a rainwater barrel near the porch, we sat on the steps drinking lemonade. He leaned back, squinting at the garden. "You ever think about doing more with this place?" he asked. "More's," I echoed. He shrugged. "You've got good land, good produce, people buying everything you grow. What if you went bigger, organic farm stand, maybe even a small business?" I laughed out loud. "I'm just a woman who got left for dead," I said, "and now I'm trying not to fall asleep with dirt in my hair." He didn't laugh. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Maybe that's exactly the kind of woman who can do something big." That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, Luke's words echoing in my mind. I still had money from my grandmother, money David wanted so badly to control. What if I used it for me? The next morning, I made calls. To a carpenter, a feed store, the county office for permits. By the end of the week, my little garden had transformed into neat rows of vegetables. A greenhouse stood beside the porch, built with reclaimed wood and clear plastic. Luke helped me every step of the way. And I woke up every morning excited. Sore, dirty, tired. But happy. My hands smelled like basil and soil, my hair like sunlight and sweat. And I loved it. When my first full harvest came in, crisp lettuce, sweet cherry tomatoes, herbs that filled the air with scent, I loaded them into Luke's truck and returned to the market. By noon, I was sold out again. One of the local chefs gave me his card. "Call me," he said. "I want to buy from you weekly." Driving home, wind in my hair, empty crates in the backseat, I smiled so wide it hurt. Luke was waiting on the porch. "Sold out?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Every single thing," I said. "Told you," he said with a grin. "Next thing you know, you'll be running the whole county." I laughed, but deep down something stirred. For so long, I had lived in other people's shadows. David's wife. Carol's disappointment. Now, I was Emily Whittaker. The woman growing her own future, one seed at a time. Somewhere between planting new seedlings and replacing the broken fence by the orchard, something began to change. Not just in the soil. In me. And in Luke. It didn't happen suddenly. No fireworks, no dramatic moments under the rain. It was slower than that. Gentler. Like two roots growing quietly side by side beneath the surface. We spent more time together, fixing things, sharing meals, sitting on the porch as dusk fell, sipping iced tea and watching the sky turn gold. He didn't push. He didn't ask for anything. He just showed up. Steady as sunrise. Sometimes he'd bring bolts or seeds, or a part I didn't know I needed. Other times, he'd bring fresh eggs from his chickens, or a peach pie he'd picked up from Martha down the road. One day, I made him cobbler from scratch, my first try. He took a bite, leaned back, and let out a soft groan. "This is the best thing I've eaten all year," he said. "And I've had Martha's pie." I laughed, really laughed, one of those deep belly laughs that surprises you. That night, after we finished building a trellis for the climbing tomatoes, we stayed on the porch long after the stars appeared. The sky stretched above us, full of crickets and fireflies. Luke looked at me. Not with pity, not with expectation. Just with a quiet warmth I hadn't seen in a long time. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked. I turned toward him. "Next." He nodded. "You've come through hell, Emily, but you're stronger now, brighter. What do you want past all this rebuilding?" I sat with the question. It echoed in my chest. For so long, I had lived moment to moment, survived the stroke, survived the betrayal, survived the silence. Now I had to ask myself what it meant to live again. "I think," I said slowly, "I just want to keep building. This house, this land, this version of myself, something that's mine, fully mine." He smiled. That quiet, knowing smile that never tried to steal the moment. Then he reached over and took my hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of work. But it was warm. And steady. And wanted. I didn't pull away. Because for the first time in years, someone was touching me not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because they simply wanted to be close. It felt simple, natural, safe. From that moment on, Luke became part of my everyday. He hauled soil. He fixed broken tools. He sat at my kitchen table for dinner like he had always belonged there. He didn't crowd me. He didn't rush anything. He just showed up. Again and again. By early fall, the the farm wasn't just a garden anymore. It had a name. Whitaker Gardens. Tatiana designed a little logo, a hand-drawn tomato plant growing from the pages of a book. Orders started coming in faster than I could handle. Luke suggested hearing help. So I put up a flyer at the general store and ended up hearing a high school senior named Brielle who was saving for college. When I handed her that first paycheck, crisp bills folded inside an envelope with her name written in my handwriting, I almost cried. I wasn't just rebuilding me anymore. I was helping someone else rise, too. That night, after dinner, I sat on the porch and looked out across the land. The greenhouse stood tall. The rows of vegetables were healthy. The barn glowed under the moonlight. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting alone, abandoned, terrified in a creaky house that smelled like mildew. And I thought about the woman I was now. Standing tall, planting roots, building a future. Not David's future, not Carol's plans, not anyone else's shadow. My own. Luke was sitting beside me, sipping his tea. He caught me staring and smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. Just warm. What? He asked. Nothing, I said. But inside, something bloomed. Not just happiness. Not just pride. Something deeper. Something like hope. And for the first time in a long time, I let the thought come all the way in. Maybe love isn't gone. Maybe it just needed time to find me again, once I found myself. Almost a year had passed. A full circle of seasons since David left me at that broken-down house, like a forgotten box in a dusty attic. I had rebuilt everything. The house. The garden. My body. My heart. I had created a life that was mine. Not borrowed, not handed down, not sacrificed for someone else's comfort. So when I heard the low growl of a familiar engine rolling up the gravel driveway, something in me went still, but not afraid. I was kneeling in the garden, hands deep in the soil, harvesting tomatoes. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stood. Slow. Steady. Strong. David's truck came into view, tires crunching over the dirt path like it had that first day. He stepped out. Same brand sunglasses, same expensive shoes, same smug smile. But I wasn't the same woman. Emily, he said casually, like no time had passed. You look great. His eyes scanned the land, greenhouse, fresh porch paint, rows of vegetables, a new sign that read Whitaker Gardens. He whistled low. You've been busy. I didn't smile. I didn't welcome him. What do you want, David? I asked. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. We need to talk about the inheritance, about how it should be divided. I actually laughed. A short, shocked laugh that slipped out before I could stop it. Divided, I repeated. You mean the inheritance you wanted to control, the one you tried to steal from me, the money you left me here to die for. He flinched, just a little, but recovered quickly. Come on, Em, he said, voice lowering like we were sharing some secret. I made mistakes, but we were married. Legally, I'm entitled. Another voice cut through the air. No, you're not. Luke. He stepped up from behind the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Calm, grounded, unmoving. David turned sharply. And who are you? He snapped. The new boyfriend, congrats, enjoy your charity case. Luke didn't flinch. But I stepped forward before he could speak. Stop, I said firmly. You don't get to call me that anymore. You don't get to call me anything. David's face twitched. Look, I know things got messy, but you can't seriously think. I don't think anything about you anymore, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It just sliced through the morning air like truth always does. You left me because it was easier than loving me through a hard time. You cheated. You lied. You planned your life with someone else while I was learning to walk again. He opened his mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. I don't hate you. I don't even wish you harm. But you're not part of this life anymore. And you are not touching a single dime of what I built. The silence that followed was thick. The wind blew gently through the tall grass. A crow called from somewhere behind the barn. David looked smaller now. Not in size, but in presence. All his power, all his arrogance, it didn't work here anymore. He tried one last time. Emily, you can't just. Luke stepped beside me. Not pushing, not claiming. Just there. Present, solid. You heard her, he said. Time to go. David stared at us. For a moment, he looked like a man trying to remember how he ended up losing everything. Then he turned without another word, climbed back into his truck, and drove away. Dust kicked up behind him, floating in the morning sun. I stood still until the sound faded, until the road was empty again. Then I exhaled. Slow, shaky, but free. Luke gently touched my shoulder. You okay? I nodded. Better than okay, I whispered, my eyes scanning the house, the land, the rows of crops I planted myself. I'm free. He smiled, small and proud. Come on, he said softly. Let's get those seedlings in before the sun sets. So we did. We worked side by side, our hands in the soil, our laughter breaking through the soft hum of cicadas and distant birdsong. As dusk fell, Luke leaned on his shovel and looked at me with a glow in his eyes that matched the golden sky. You've come a long way, Emily. I smiled back, brushing a streak of dirt from my cheek. Yeah, and I'm not done yet. That night, after we finished planting the last row of seedlings, we sat on the porch. The sky was fading from gold to indigo, stars blinking through the branches of the old oak trees. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy like before, it was full. Full of peace, full of breath, full of something I never thought I'd feel again. Wholeness. Luke handed me a glass of iced tea, our fingers brushed. This time, I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in, just slightly, and let the warmth of his presence wrap around me like a soft blanket. It wasn't passion that came rushing in. It was something slower. Something real. Like love was growing from the same soil I'd planted my hope in. A month later, Woodacre Gardens hosted its first community day. The weather was perfect, bright sun, a soft breeze, and the smell of wildflowers drifting on the air. Families came in groups, little kids laughing as they ran between the vegetable rows. Mrs. Alvarez brought jam. Martha read stories under the old elm tree. Tatiana set up a table for painting little plant pots with the children. Luke helped man the lemonade stand, standing tall in his straw hat, passing out cold drinks with that quiet smile of his. I stood near the entrance, greeting each guest, offering baskets and napkins, feeling like a different person entirely. A little girl tugged my sleeve to show me the pumpkin she'd picked. Her hands were muddy, her face glowing. It's the biggest one, she shouted. I laughed and crouched down to admire it with her. Then I felt arms wrap around me from behind. Tatiana. Tears sparkled in her eyes as she pulled me into a hug. Look at you, she whispered. Look what you built. I looked around. The garden. The greenhouse. The music playing softly from a local guitarist under the trees. And Luke standing near the porch, laughing with some neighbors, his smile turning to me every few moments, like he couldn't believe I was real. It was all real. I had created something not from anger, not from revenge, but from survival. From choice. From love. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was simply living. When the event wound down and the sun dipped low in the sky, I stepped away for a moment. Stood at the edge of the land. Closed my eyes. Breath deep. The scent of cedar, basil, warm soil, and cinnamon from someone's pie drifted on the breeze. I whispered to myself, "This is home. This is my life. And it's beautiful." That night, Luke and I sat on the porch in silence. No music. No voices. Just crickets. Just us. He reached over and took my hand. This time, I laced my fingers through his. Not because I needed saving. Not because I was lost. But because I had finally found myself. And maybe, just maybe, love had found me too, right when I was finally ready to receive it. The days after Community Day felt different. The land looked the same, green rose, rising sun, bees moving gently from flower to flower, but something in me had changed. I no longer woke up feeling like I had something to prove. Now I woke up simply grateful. For breaths. For strength. For the dirt under my fingernails and the calluses on my palms. The garden had grown, yes. But so had I. One afternoon, I found a letter in the mailbox. It had no return address. Inside was a check. Large, too large. Folded with a handwritten note that said, "I wanted to make things right, use it for whatever you need, D." I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it in half, walked to the wood stove, and dropped it into the fire. I didn't need it. I didn't need anything from David, not his guilt, not his money, not his ghost. The truth was, I had already received the greatest gift possible. My freedom. And I had earned it the hard way. That summer, Luke and I expanded the greenhouse. Brielle brought her little brother to help harvest peas. Martha gave me an old rocking chair for the porch. Tatiana installed shelves in the shed and teased me that I was officially a farmer now. We laughed more. Worked harder. Ached together. And somewhere between weeding beds and baking fresh bread, Luke and I became something real. There was no grand confession. No flash of lightning. Just a slow becoming. He made room for my strength. I made room for his quiet. We didn't rescue each other. We stood beside each other. Rooted. One night in late August, a storm rolled in. The sky cracked with thunder. Rain poured down, wild and loud. Luke and I moved quickly, covering the crops, locking the barn, gathering tools. We were soaked to the skin by the time we made it to the porch, laughing breathlessly like children. Lightning lit up the sky, and I looked at him, really looked. His shirt clung to him, his eyes glowing under the porch light. And something inside me softened, melted. I stepped closer. And this time, I kissed him. Not to erase pain. Not to forget the past. But to celebrate the present. The woman I had become. The life I had built. The man I had chosen. Months later, I stood at the front of a small wooden stall at the market. A new sign hung overhead. Whitaker Gardens, local, organic, reborn. People lined up. Customers returned week after week. Local stores placed standing orders. A newspaper ran a small story on us. Widow turns forgotten farm into local treasure. I smiled at the title. Not because it made me proud, but because it was only half true. I wasn't just a widow. I was a builder. A woman who stood again. A survivor who found strength in soil and sunshine. A heart that had broken and grown back stronger. The nightmares came less and less. Now when I woke in the dark, I had someone beside me, a steady hand, a soft voice, a quiet strength. One night, I sat up in bed and looked out at the moonlit fields. I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." Because without that letter, that house, that land, I might never have discovered the woman I really was. I didn't get revenge. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't make anyone beg. Instead, I chose healing over hate. I chose roots over running. I chose love, not the old, broken kind, but the kind that grows after the storm, and that made all the difference. 1 year to the day after I first arrived at the house, I stood again on the same porch where David had dropped me off. Only this time, I was barefoot, holding a fresh basket of tomatoes and smiling. Luke walked up beside me, kissed my cheek and whispered, "We're just getting started." I looked out over the land, my land. The wind danced through the trees. The air smelled like basil and hope. This was my life. And it was beautiful.